Somewhere in your city right now, someone is standing outside a building, alone, inhaling smoke on purpose. It looks like a modern habit, a modern vice, tangled up with lighters and packaging and warning labels. It is not modern at all. In 2021, archaeologists excavating a rock shelter in the Great Salt Lake Desert of Utah found something that shouldn't have been possible. Charred seeds, tucked into ancient fire pits, chemically tested positive for nicotine. The site was dated to roughly 12,300 years ago. That is over 7,000 years before the invention of writing, before the pyramids, before agriculture had even begun in most of the world. And already, someone was burning a plant specifically to inhale what it produced. So the real question isn't whether ancient humans smoked. It's how deep this goes. How far back does the urge to breathe and smoke on purpose actually reach? Let's start with fire itself, because before there was smoking, there was simply fire, and humans have been living inside its haze for a staggering length of time. At Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, researchers found burned bone fragments and ash dated to around 1 million years ago, among the earliest solid evidence of controlled fire use by early humans. For 1 million years, hominins have been sitting inside caves, breathing smoke, watching it curl toward the ceiling. That's not smoking in the way you think of it. Nobody was chasing a nicotine buzz around a campfire 1 million years ago, but it planted something. It normalized inhaling combustion byproducts as part of daily survival. And somewhere down that long line, someone noticed that certain plants, when burned, did more than warm the air. They changed how you felt. This is where the story splits into two threads, and both are stranger than the neat history of tobacco version you might expect. Thread 1. Tobacco. The Utah nicotine seeds predate the plant most people associate with early tobacco use by thousands of years. But the more commonly cited timeline centers on the Americas, where tobacco was domesticated somewhere between 6,000 and 8,000 years ago. For the peoples of the Americas, tobacco wasn't a casual habit. It was closer to a sacred technology. Among many indigenous nations, tobacco was smoked, chewed, or snuffed as part of ceremony, used to seal agreements, mark rites of passage, and communicate with the spirit world. Shamans in parts of the Amazon used concentrated tobacco preparations to induce altered states during healing rituals, sometimes ingesting doses so strong they induced trembling and vomiting as part of the ritual itself. Compare that to the version of tobacco you know. A rolled cylinder, a convenience store, a 5-minute break. Somewhere in the last 500 years, the ceremony got stripped out and only the chemistry stayed behind. Here's the pivot point where that happened, and it has a name attached to it. In 1492, a sailor named Rodrigo de Jerez, part of Columbus's crew, watched the Taino people of Cuba smoking rolled tobacco leaves. He tried it. He liked it enough to bring the habit home to Spain. According to popular historical accounts, when his neighbors saw smoke pouring out of his mouth and nose, they reported him to the Spanish Inquisition, convinced he was possessed by the devil. He was reportedly imprisoned for years over it. Whether every detail of that account is precisely accurate is debated by historians, but the core fact isn't. Tobacco entered Europe as something genuinely alien. Nobody there had ever seen a human being exhale smoke voluntarily, on purpose, for pleasure. It looked like sorcery. Within a century, it was everywhere. Sailors, then nobles, then entire economies reorganized around it. What began as a sacred plant used sparingly in ceremony became one of the most heavily cultivated cash crops on Earth. Now, thread 2. Because tobacco is only half of this story, and it's not even the oldest half. In 2019, researchers examined wooden braziers unearthed from the Jerzankal Cemetery high in the Pamir Mountains of western China. Using chemical analysis, they detected traces consistent with cannabis, and, notably, with a chemical signature suggesting the plants had elevated levels of THC, the compound responsible for cannabis's psychoactive effects. The burial site was dated to roughly 2,500 years ago. This wasn't casual use. Researchers proposed the braziers were used in funeral ceremonies, where mourners burned cannabis and inhaled the resulting smoke as part of grieving rituals. Structurally, that's not so different from what you saw in the earlier video on ancient grief. Fire, smoke, and ritual, all tangled together at the edge of death. And this evidence lines up almost eerily well with something written centuries later, half a world away. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing around 440 BCE, described a Scythian burial custom involving hemp seeds thrown onto heated stones inside an enclosed tent. According to his account, the resulting vapor made the mourners howl with what he called pleasure. For a long time, some scholars treated this as exaggeration or myth. The Dzerzhankal find changed that conversation. Suddenly, an ancient Greek account of intentional cannabis inhalation had physical, chemical evidence backing it up, thousands of miles from where Herodotus was writing. So by roughly 2,500 years ago, on at least two separate continents, humans had independently arrived at the same idea. Burn a plant, breathe the smoke, alter the mind. Why does this keep happening, over and over, in cultures with no contact with each other? Because smoke is an unusually efficient delivery system. And the human body figured that out long before anyone understood pharmacology. When you inhale smoke, active compounds bypass digestion entirely. They cross into your bloodstream through the lungs almost instantly. No waiting for a stomach to break anything down. The effect arrives in seconds, not hours. Ancient people didn't need a chemistry degree to notice that. They just needed to try it once. There's a broader pattern hiding underneath all of this, and it's worth sitting with for a second. Across wildly different ancient societies, separated by oceans and thousands of years, the earliest documented uses of psychoactive smoke are rarely recreational. They're ceremonial. Funerals, healing rituals, communication with ancestors or spirits. The casual, everyday version, the one you might picture when you hear the word smoking, is actually the historical outlier. It's a relatively recent flattening of something that used to be treated as powerful, even dangerous, and definitely not casual. Modern researchers studying nicotine's effects on the brain have found it activates the same reward pathways involved in many other forms of pleasure and habit formation, which is part of why it took hold so fast once it left ceremonial contexts and entered ordinary daily life. The ritual container disappeared. The chemistry didn't care. It kept doing exactly what it had always done to the human nervous system, ceremony or not. So think about that Utah rock shelter again, 12,300 years old, tucked into the desert. Someone crouched by that fire, dropped in a handful of seeds, and breathed in something they couldn't name but could clearly feel. They had no idea they were starting a habit that would eventually cross oceans, get someone arrested by the Spanish Inquisition, get burned in funeral tents by Scythian mourners, get planted across entire continents as a cash crop, and end up in your hand, or your neighbor's hand, on a random weekday afternoon. 12,000 years later, somewhere in your city right now, someone is standing outside a building, alone, inhaling smoke on purpose. They probably don't know it, but they're repeating one of the oldest rituals humans have ever performed. And that's the thing about being human. Most of what feels brand new is actually just an old habit wearing a new face. If your brain just got rewired a little, subscribe. This channel exists to find the ancient thing hiding inside the ordinary thing. New one drops soon.